of warm sunshine.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, is Britain no longer a Christian country? Church of England clergymen have suggested exactly that in a Times poll, annulling St Augustine of Canterbury's work. Christianity is interwoven into our constitution, laws and traditions at least since 597, when St Gregory the Great sent St Augustine to be the apostle of the English. Is it the latest chapter in the very long book of Broken Britain, as the Notting Hill Carnival has seen its highest rate of stabbings in years? But the government has banned machetes and zombie-style knives, as well as strengthening the police's powers to crack down on knife crime. Will this be what it takes to get crime under control, or are cities destined for San Franciscan anarchy? Are the political poles shifting as the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is in Peking with his Chinese counterpart after controversially claiming that we shouldn't isolate the Chinese communists? We'll be hearing from a dove and a hawk, but as ever, there'll be no perching on the fence. The Duke of Sussex may yet win back the affection of the nation as he releases another Netflix documentary. This time, it's about the laudable Invictus Games, a rather more salubrious topic than his life of hardship. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a formidable panel this evening, the pugnacious former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the Industrials in Action Studies degree-holding former Labour MP, Britain's favourite socialist, Stephen Pound. As always, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Tatiana Sanchez.
Jacob, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The inquiry into how serial child killer Lucy Letby was able to murder 7 babies will now have greater powers to compel witnesses to give evidence. Ministers upgraded the independent inquiry after criticism from families of the victims that it didn't go far enough. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says he's listened to the families' victims and has decided a statutory inquiry led by a judge is the best way forward and respects the wishes of the families. It comes as the Ministry of Justice announced the power to order an offender to attend their sentencing hearing under new legislation. Lucy Letby refused to attend her sentencing and hear the testimony of her victims' families. Met Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley has welcomed government plans to ban zombie-style knives. According to the Home Office, work is underway to increase the maximum sentence for their importation, manufacture, possession and sale to 2 years. Police will also have greater powers to tackle offenders who use them. Sir Mark said the weapons are doing awful damage in the capital. The Prime Minister says those hit by new ULEZ charges shouldn't expect any more financial assistance from the government. Speaking to GB News, Rishi Sunak said he understands the frustration felt by residents forced to pay a daily charge due to the expansion of the Mayor of London's Clean Air scheme. He also urged the Labour Party to explain why they think it's right to go ahead with the plan when families are struggling with the rising cost of living.
This is solely the responsibility of the Labour Party and the Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer. It's for them to explain why they think this is the right thing to do, and they should do that. I don't think it's the right priority. People have made their views very clear, and now it's up to them to explain themselves and why they think this is the right thing to do.
James Cleverly has become the first Foreign Secretary to visit China in 5 years. During the visit, Mr Cleverly held face-to-face talks with Vice President Han Zheng and told broadcasters the UK is clear-eyed that China will not change overnight. He also said it's important to maintain regular dialogue as we seek to influence the country. The trip's been met with criticism from some Tory MPs who want a tougher stance against Beijing. And finally, EasyJet is carrying out 3 days of repatriation flights after an air traffic control fault left thousands of British tourists stranded abroad. The first from Palma and Faro are flying into London Gatwick, while additional flights will take place tomorrow and Friday. The airline's also deploying larger aircraft on key routes to accommodate 700 more people. More than 250,000 holidaymakers are thought to have been affected by the disruption. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Jacob.
It was the Venerable Bede who first conceptualised the idea of the English in his great work, The History of the English Church and People, in which he recounted a tale from the 590s. Legend has it that the then Pope, Gregory the Great, saw some particularly fine-looking slaves at a market in Rome. When he asked where they were from, he was told the slaves were Angles. In a famous quip, he replied, "Not Angles, but angels." It was he who then sent St Augustine to convert England, since when we have been a Christian country. Yet a new poll of the Church of England for the Times suggests that the clergy themselves no longer believe that we are a Christian country. The poll, which surveyed 1,200 clergymen, the first conducted in nearly a decade, revealed that under a quarter of the pool believed Britain can be described accurately as a Christian country. It also shone a light on some of the defeatist approach of these clerics to the dogmas of Christianity. But even if numbers going to church is in decline, if Christianity is not as strong as it once was, that does not stop our nation from being a Christian country. Let's look at the history. St Augustine converted Athelbert of Kent, and Athelbert then issued laws in around 602 AD Ine of Wessex did the same in around 694. And these Christian documents were codified and expanded by Alfred the Great in the Doom Book of 893. Now, why am I talking of the Dark Ages into the Anglo-Saxon period? Well, because the Doom Book, which has the Ten Commandments prefixed to it and incorporates the ethical rules both of Moses and of Christ, is the foundational document of the common law which still rules us today. And this is really interesting and exciting because if you look at part of the reason behind Brexit, it was because of the clash between the common law and the civil code. Now, the common law from Alfred is based on a Christian understanding of law and of human nature. The civil code, tied up with the French Revolution and Napoleon, is based on the God of reason. And the European Union is essentially an atheistic state, whereas the United Kingdom is a Christian state and continues to be so regardless of what these clerics have to say, based on our law and our constitution. And we see this if we look at policies that have been implemented in this country. Look at the influence of Christianity in some of our great campaigners in the 19th century. Wilberforce on slavery. What was his motivating force? He was an evangelical Christian, as was Shaftesbury, a Tory, pushing for factory acts. Read, if you haven't already, Tom Holland's brilliant work called Dominion, which explains how the welfare state comes out of a Christian understanding, why we value the life and appreciate that every soul has value, from my point of view, from the moment of conception through to the point of natural death. This is the underpinning of our whole society that is based on the Gospels. And we see it not just in our laws, but in the symbols of society. Just look at the coronation. The coronation is a ceremony that St Dunstan would have been familiar with. Look at the symbols of secular authority. You would have seen in the news the royal coat of arms outside the Royal Courts of Justice. What is in the centre? A crown with a cross on it. The cross is throughout our public life. We have bishops in the House of Lords, and they are there representing our history and our Christian nature. So, we may not be St Augustine's, this is the other St Augustine of Hippo, not of Canterbury. We may not be his city of God, we may not be perfect, but we are a Christian nation. And what is so tragic is the defeatism of the Church of England. And unlike Nigel Farage, I actually have great sympathy for the Archbishop of Canterbury. I think he has such a difficult job, which it's clear today is harder because his own clerics don't have the positive outlook of proselytization that Christianity has always had. Fortunately, this is not the view of other Christians. It's certainly not the view of the Catholic Church, which is still very positive, but also non-Catholics, non-Catholic Christians who continue to preach the faith. I bumped into a gentleman I see quite often outside the House of Parliament who regularly preaches the gospel. When I saw him yesterday, he told me I mustn't promote the Catholic Church on GB News. They phrased it more politely than that. But I must talk about Jesus and the Gospels. There are still many confident Christians like him, and the Anglican Church could do with a transfusion of them. But of course, Vox Populi, Vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God. And today we ask the good people of Hull if they think Britain is a Christian country, and the people have spoken.
Yes, Christianity in our town is. We've got quite a few churches. I believe a church is like a good pub. If you've got a good minister, you've got a good service.
Yeah, I think maybe the values have changed throughout the years, but I think more importantly, it's just more mixed now. It's not so predominantly Christian.
Not really, no. There's a lot of different cultures now and different religions, you know, which we've got to respect that. Every country's different, aren't they?
Yes, it does play a part, and I don't even think you have to be religious because they bring other things into the church.
I'm joined now by Monsignor Michael Nazir Ali, a former Church of England bishop and now a Catholic priest, indeed, promoted by the Holy Father to Monsignor. Thank you very much for joining me. You must look at the clerics in your former church with deep sadness that such an important institution in England's public Christian life has so many clergy, has so defeatist.
Well, I think, first of all, Jacob, the survey that the Times has done, I'm not really convinced by it, to be quite honest. I don't know who's done it. The agency The usual agencies are not named. The sample is very small. So they say they sampled 5,000 clergy, of which 1,400 responded, of which they have chosen under 1,200. That's 6% of the clergy. So majority opinions that they are reporting actually constitute about 3% of the clergy. Mm-hmm. So what do the rest think, I'm asking? It also depends on the questions they were asked and who was encouraged to respond. I mean, all of those things. So I'm not really convinced. But as you have said already, to the question, is this a Christian country? The answer cannot just be given by counting heads, even clergy heads, or even Episcopal heads, if you want. This has to do with those very deep things in the culture and in our constitution that continue to be irreducibly Christian. You mentioned the coronation, we might mention the Queen's funeral.
Yes.
I mean, that reached billions of people in the world, and it was a profoundly Christian occasion. You mentioned Alfred, but we could talk about Magna Carta, the very basis of our freedoms.
Well, I couldn't make my monologue too long. It was in an earlier draft that...
Well, no, you had to leave something for me to say.
And you're absolutely right. The first part of Magna Carta says the Church in England shall be free, and it is underpinning Thomas Becket's martyrdom against Henry II in favour of an independent church.
Well, that's right. So the very basis of law, of the constitutional monarchy itself, is a product of the Judeo-Christian tradition and of the teaching of the Bible. But then also this idea of the human person. You mentioned Tom Holland. I might mention Larry Siedentop, an Oxford academic, who has actually shown that the whole idea of personhood, as we value it in our liberal society, has very deep Christian roots. Now, he is not himself a Christian, but he has identified this.
And it's one of the most interesting things about Tom Holland's book is that the teaching of Christianity in the Roman world was deeply shocking, that they thought that if you were unfortunate, that was it. You didn't deserve anything from anybody else. And Christians came along and said, no, every soul is valued by God. But this was a revelation, a deeply shocking and surprising view.
You see, all the rights belonged to the heads of the households and all the duties to everyone else. Christianity replaced this by the idea of the equality of persons, developed throughout the centuries by canon law, by the way, particularly in relation to marriage, for instance, and the position of women, how that was improved by canon law provision for marriage. So, cruelty for pleasure, female infanticide, easy divorce, no role for women in the public. I mean, all of this was replaced.
Absolutely. Well, one of the earliest things the Christians do is rescue babies who have been exposed in ancient Rome because the head of the household, I think, had a fortnight to decide whether or not to keep the baby or to expose it. And as you say, Christians recognising the dignity of the individual were appalled by that and eventually stopped it.
Yeah, I mean, the reason people were so shocked by the Lucy Letby case was precisely because of the Christian formation still of people's minds and hearts.
And that's what I'm trying to argue, is that although not so many people go to church as used to, actually the structures of our society are still fundamentally Christian, enormously to the benefit of society.
Yes, and when you come to things like funerals, you know, grief, consolation, celebration, then those nodal points in human lives, then the Christian expression is the one that people turn to.
So what, if we accept this report, and I note your qualifications, which are obviously important, but if we accept it, what would you be saying to your former bishops in the Church of England? How do they get back some determination, some backbone, really, to stand up for what they believe in the success of Christianity, to be proud of it, rather than, if you boast in anything, as St. Paul says, boast in the Lord? That doesn't seem to be happening.
Well, certitude, I think, is the point, that, as St. Paul said, if the trumpet gives an uncertain sound, then no one's going to follow. So I think if we are clear about the faith that we have inherited from the apostles and from Christ himself, then people will see the reason for it. They will see it not only in church, but in human living, in the family, for instance, and why the family is ordered in the way that it is, in a just society, in valuing life from the very beginning to the very end. I mean, all of those things. So Christian faith and Christian values are necessary for living in all sorts of ways, even in legislation. I mean, you're a legislator, but don't want to teach grandma how to suck eggs. But you know how often in legislation questions arise which can only be settled by an appeal to the Christian tradition. I mean, take just war, the justification
indeed.
of conflict.
That is going to be another conversation about Thomas Aquinas, who is one of my great heroes. But thank you very much, Monsignor. Don't forget to let me know what you think, mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, is Britain headed for San Franciscan anarchy? Plus, Duke of Sussex is back in the news, despite allegedly being desperate for privacy.
This September, the GB News family is back together. From breakfast, right across the day, breaking the latest stories, and every evening. And don't forget the weekend. We've got the whole of the UK covered. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country, with fun, lively and intelligent conversation with the biggest guests. This September, we'll meet Chris and John. Thank you for choosing GB News. We're proud to be Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You've probably guessed I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. And you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Della, we must remain a Christian nation to sustain our culture, laws and values, regardless of the number of churchgoers. And Graham, you went into a lot of detail and historical facts. However, none of that makes people feel like they live in a Christian country. It's not about the history, it's about what people feel. Almost every day, the once civilized American city of San Francisco seems to head the way of the cities of the plain as a modern Sodom or Gomorrah. The city is overridden with crime. This year alone, the city of St. Francis has seen nearly 2,000 robberies, over 1,500 assaults, nearly 4,000 burglaries, more than 4,000 vehicle thefts, and over 20,000 larcenies. It's probably safer to holiday in Kabul. The question is, could British cities be heading for this sort of anarchy? This weekend, Notting Hill Carnival saw its worst rate of stabbings for years. Luckily, nobody died, but people were found in critical conditions, not to mention the total arrests of 308 people for sexual and drug-related crimes, as well as more than 50 assaults on the police. The Home Office announced fresh powers will be granted to the police, enabling them to seize and destroy machetes and zombie knives, which featured at the incidents over the weekend. So could we be looking at a turning point on knife crime, or are we headed for San Franciscan anarchy? I'm joined now by my panel, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. Stephen, is the Notting Hill Carnival an opening to anarchy, or is this just something that happens once a year and we should put up with it?
There's certainly some profound problems. Look, I'm not entirely sure that the comparison with Sodom and Gomorrah is... I always wonder what they got up to in Gomorrah. We all know what they did in Sodom, but, you know, who knows? But the point is San Francisco is a basket case right the way across the state, which is why people are leaving and going to, well, you know, the so-called red states. But look, here's the strange thing. I've been going to the Notting Hill Carnival for years. I'm from that part of the world. Sunday, the family day, is marvellous. It's light-hearted, it's full of children, everybody's having a great time, and it actually celebrates culture. It's an excellent thing. Monday is an absolute dystopic nightmare, and that's when you had the 8 stabbings, the police officers being bitten, you know, these terrible things. So the reality is that it's a victim of its own success. It is too big now, and really and truly we should concentrate on the family day, and if you could relocate the Monday, maybe to Hyde Park, you know, maybe to Wilmot Scrubs, I don't know, somewhere.
Wilmot Scrubs.
Well, no, the Wilmot Scrubs is a huge...
not the prison. I thought you were suggesting that if they're in prison, they won't stab each other.
It's a massive, great open space in West London, as Kelvin knows.
I'm puzzled as to why our police force have to be put through this. They know full well, the police officers, the senior commanders know that their officers are going to be attacked. They know that they are going to have to break up potentially knife fights, which could lead to the officers being killed or injured. Why do we allow this to go ahead? Is 300 arrests not an enormous number? I would have thought it was. And when I don't know whether you saw, the thing that really came home to me was the picture on the front page of the Times this morning.
Chap with the dreadlocks.
The guy with the dreadlocks with a machete. It's a zombie knife.
Yeah.
Right, serrated edge. It must be, I don't know, it looked about 12 inches long. That is the weapon of choice for the drug gangs of London. But when you read about these youngsters being murdered in the streets, they are killed by such knives. Why on earth?
Is this a more profound point, that we simply need to make up our minds on our drug laws, that we've got lots of drug laws which we simply don't enforce, and therefore it's a free-for-all, and once you create disrespect for the law, people are happy to ignore other laws?
Well, this is, you know, the broken windows theory, which is you know, I can entirely understand. But look, the Conservatives have been talking about banning zombie knives for at least 6 years, to my certain knowledge. And, you know, for various reasons, I quite often had to visit the West London pathologist, you know, because we have so much of that sort of thing around my way. And he said to me, if you actually stopped selling pointed knives and had curved ends to knives, overnight it would solve half the problem, because you ban zombie knives by all means, but most of it is kitchen knives. You go into Argos and you buy a load of kitchen knives, and the damage is always done with that pointed thing. Now, look, you would say that Sabatier make these marvellous chef's knives and things. Well, you know, chefs don't need to have a point on, except for very, very few items of culinary preparation. To have a curved knife tip would actually save lives.
And with the Notting Hill Carnival, is it exceptional? Because I've got some figures that are interesting on Glastonbury. Well, on Glastonbury, there were 36 arrests for a proportionally much smaller event. 69 arrests at the Leeds Carnival. I mean, I've also got the Clutton Flower Show, which had no arrests, and I opened this year and last year and many years before. It's completely civilised. So we do have events that don't have this crime. But do these large-scale events always go in a criminal direction? Is it just in their nature with so many people?
Look, I think one of the issues that you face around the Notting Hill issue, of course, is one of minorities, which nobody wants to talk about, and I quite understand that. But it would be very interesting to know what the breakdown of the arrests every year looks like. And honestly, I come back to that picture on the front page today. And it is one thing and one thing only. There is somebody doing this. There are no police officers around. There are loads of people scared. Surely something... do we need to put more police officers in? Or do we need to say, actually, I didn't realise the point that was made, do we need to say Monday is gone?
Or do we just need to arrest people? And is it good news that the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police has said we're not going to have woke policing anymore, we're not going to have rainbows, and we're not going to have people taking the knee, because that is stopping the police from getting on with their job? It's a political distraction.
It's a fantastic thing. What an incredible moment that we've come to. So under one commissioner, you have the knee being taken, and basically there's off-the-record briefing saying, oh, well, very good, all this. And now we've got another one saying we're never going to have this again.
Well, the thing is, the first Notting Hill Carnival, I remember it quite well, you had police officers eating ice creams and, limboing, down Westbourne Grove, which is, I thought that actually shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't have done that, because that actually immediately destroys the distance that the police officers have. The police should be the impartial guardians, but also the enforcers of the law. But look, you talk about putting them in the cells. Round my way, there are no police cells. I think there's about 3 in the whole of Ealing. And if you want to arrest anybody in West London now, you have to take them to Heathrow Airport. There's a holding place they call Polar Point, because they don't have the police stations. So this factors in, I hate to say this, into so many other aspects. The absence of police stations, the absence of visible policing, and the complete logjam, the sclerotic nature of the British courts, where if you come to a court today, you're probably not going to actually go to sentencing for 2 years.
Absolutely. So if you're arrested in Notting Hill Carnival for a minor public order offence, there's no magistrate who's going to fine you £100 the following day, is there? You're going to wait months.
The police courts don't exist in, but we do not have police courts.
Right, but why wouldn't we establish a Notting Hill Carnival police court? Because we know for absolute certainty that people
we will have these
arrests. Be arrested.
Have you got the figure for how many police officers were on duty over the weekend?
I haven't got that figure, no.
It's fantastic.
Perhaps somebody will mail Mogg with the figure, because my correspondents are up to every fact. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, have we ducked to Peking?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the latest forecast from the Met Office here at GB News. Clear at first over the next 24 hours. Clouds then increase, rain spreading up from the southwest for many of us later on. We've got a gap in between weather systems for the time being, low pressure pushing into the North Sea, but the next low is on the way, bringing a series of weather fronts that will particularly affect Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest by the end of the night. Already the clouds are thickening across western areas through the evening and overnight. Clear spells for Scotland, central and eastern England at first, and actually quite a fresh feel here first thing Thursday with temperatures widely in the single figures. Not quite so fresh further west, where we've got the cloud keeping things a bit milder, and we've also got the rain moving in first thing. Some heavier pulses across parts of Northern Ireland during the morning, as well as Wales and the southwest. That rain slowly pushes into the rest of Wales, the Midlands, southeast England, but it largely avoids Scotland, where we just see 1 or 2 light showers in the afternoon, likewise for the north and northeast of England. Feeling warm where we do get some sunshine coming through, feeling disappointingly cool across the central slice of the UK, 16-17, where we've got the outbreaks of rain. Further rain to come across northern England into parts of North Wales, Northern Ireland during Friday morning. Heavy showers clear the southeast, but further downpours are likely into the afternoon. Then the weather settles down this weekend. High pressure builds, plenty of warm sunshine.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Robert says, violence at the Notting Hill is an annual event. No other event would be able to get away with such behaviour, so why is it just accepted? It should be either moved to a field somewhere or banned. And Val says, I would have banned Notting Hill Carnival ages ago. One of the reasons for this country's decline is our misplaced tolerance. And I've also had a message to say that there were 12,500 police shifts during the Notting Hill Carnival. That is a lot of police time. Today, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, met senior Chinese officials in Peking in a bid to ease tensions between the UK and China. It's been 5 years since the UK's last face-to-face meeting with China, and James Cleverly has said this in-person meeting was essential to avoid further, quote, misunderstandings. Ahead of the Foreign Secretary's visit, Conservative MPs raised concern over the government's soft-touch approach to China, as long as a critical report by the cross-party Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which was issued today. It calls for His Majesty's government to take a stronger stance against China's transnational repression and calls out their inadequacy to meaningfully deter threats to the UK's sovereignty. They brand the activities of the CCP, that's the Communist Party, a threat to the UK and its interests. None of this is to forget the looming threat of an invasion of Taiwan as China repeatedly engages in acts of military aggression in the Taiwan Strait. Setting aside the breaches of international law at play, Taiwan's contribution to the global economy is really important. An invasion would pose a huge threat to British interests. Well, I'm now joined by the Dove, our very own China correspondent, Stanley Johnson, along with a slightly more hawkish chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Cairns. Stanley, do we no longer care about the people of Hong Kong?
Of course I care about people from Hong Kong. I care about the whole set of the relationships between Britain and China. And I think that what Mr. Cleverly is doing today is a really good thing to happen. I think it is high time we try to reset, revert, if you like, to what you might call the Cameron Osborne set of relationship with China. And by the way, I did read your report, and congratulations on it. I didn't see it in any way as the kind of hawkish representation which you just gave.
OK, but isn't it absolutely classic British foreign policy towards China? China does something outrageous, like the security law in Hong Kong. It breaks the joint declaration. We make a few noises at the time, and China, a very ancient civilization, plays the long game because it knows if it waits a few years, will dutifully kowtow.
Well, it's funny you raise Hong Kong. I mean, taking the long view of Hong Kong, you might say, you know, Britain fought 2 opium wars to have the right to sell opium to the people of China. They kind of got Hong Kong at the end of it and a few other places too. I'm not particularly sort of worried about there's a longer-term historical role of Britain in Hong Kong. And I think that China has Hong Kong. There is an agreement, and that agreement is up to a point being respected.
And Alicia, isn't it just a question of realpolitik that China's big, it's rich, we want the money, we want the investment, we want them to run our nuclear power stations, however wise that may be, and therefore every so often we send over a diplomat to kneel at the court of the Dragon Prince.
I mean, that's what I'm hoping it wasn't, but I share your concerns.
I'm surprised you didn't say kowtow, Jacob.
I did already. I didn't want to say it twice. I actually know how the kowtow is performed, but I'm not going to do it.
We're very happy to have a live course.
I don't think the cameras can catch it very well.
Well, we'll work on that for the next interview. But that's my big worry. And I know a lot of our colleagues have been very critical of James for going. My view has been that actually I want the Chinese Communist Party to see the whites of James's eyes and to see how serious he is for him to draw some lines in the sand and say, we will not allow or tolerate this continued transnational repression. We will stand up and be vocal about the importance of self-determination, about rule of law, about human rights. And actually, who else is delivering those messages to the Chinese Communist Party? They need to hear it from someone. But obviously, we've got to wait for James to be back on terra firma to know how well those points were landed.
And should he therefore go on to Taiwan to show that he is an independent-minded foreign secretary, not somebody who has just gone to China to apologise for previous errors?
Absolutely. And on Taiwan, look, we have to be absolutely forthright. When we say we respect self-determination and we want to protect that for Taiwan, it's not just because of the international maritime waters that we have to protect, but actually it's because of the values we support. But actually that isn't a threat to China. And one of the things I really hope James has landed is that defence is not an escalation, no matter how much the Chinese Communist Party wants to misrepresent it as that. And standing up for those values, again, is not a threat to China. The status quo is what people in Taiwan want to continue, and that's what needs to be continued to be respected.
Stanley, do you think the Foreign Secretary should go on to Taiwan?
I think the Foreign Secretary is doing a good job out there. I'm just looking to what he said as he came out of the meetings. I've had a number of conversations with senior representatives of the Chinese government, and I've raised human rights in every single one of those meetings, and I will continue to do so. And by the way, he's also raised, I'll get your point about Taiwan in a moment, he's also raised a whole lot of issues to do with biodiversity, climate change, and he has said some very good things. And by the way, from my own experience, because I've actually spent a lot of time with the Chinese people and Chinese government on these wider issues, and you mentioned those in your report too.
And forgive me, just on that point, the fact that they didn't do a joint press conference and then the visit tells me that actually James probably was quite tough in that.
Yeah.
Because what they don't want is a chance for British media to ask genuinely tough questions or for James to, in front of the Chinese interlocutors, embarrass them. So I think that shows that James probably was as tough as he promised he would be, but apologies.
On the Taiwan point, I think China, it must be tremendously aware that they can't afford to rock the boat on China, given how much the Chinese economy itself depends on chips coming from China. So it'd be a very high-stake move from their point of view.
Would also be completely legitimate. I mean, China didn't care about Taiwan until Chiang Kai-shek went and hid out there. I mean, there's no historical ability for them to claim ownership of it.
Well, I mean, except they claim ownership of lots of... same true of Tibet and
well, they
and
put
so
a map
on.
out today saying they own part of Russia and part of India and all sorts, so...
I think we've got to look at this in a really positive way. Honestly, I think that this is the moment to seize the opportunity, which appears to have opened up. I think the Prime Minister is going to possibly meet Xi Jinping in Delhi in a few days' time.
In the G20.
And I think that's another moment.
But are we getting the message across? Is there any change in the treatment of the Uyghurs? Is there any change in the treatment of the people of Tibet? Is there any change in Hong Kong?
I spent a whole month in Xinjiang last month. I think we arrived under the high Himalayas on May the 6th. At the day of the coronation, I missed the coronation. You were probably there.
No, I wasn't. No,
you were.
I was watching it on telly, on GBNews.
Anyway, sorry, just I'm digressing. Look, of course, I'm just there, going from Kashgar to Yokan to Markan to Khotan. Honestly, I tell you, my eyes were open, and I did not sense that this was a society under the thumb of repression.
And were you allowed to move about freely, or were you being taken around by guides?
No, we certainly did. We danced in the streets of Kashgar.
But forgive me, you're not a Uyghur Muslim, and the reality is we've seen the satellite images of mosques being absolutely demolished. That's categorical fact.
I went to a mosque in Kashgar.
I'm sure, yes, because what they're doing, the Chinese Communist Party, is they're paying Chinese tourists to go, and they do this cultural tourism where they say, the same as the Assad regime does in Syria, to say that everything's lovely and respectful. But the reality is the women I've met who've been forcibly sterilised, the women raped on a monthly basis to essentially breed the Uyghur out of them, these are facts. These are not made up. What I do think is interesting is since 2019, when I stood for election, I actually raised the Uyghur genocide as one of the things I was wanting to deal with in Parliament. I do think we've seen the worst excesses slightly reduced because of the attention. The Chinese communists were absolutely amazed that we were so interested and that we put such a light on it. And so it does matter that we show, particularly when Muslim-majority country leaders are completely missing in action on this, it does matter that we say we will not stop talking about this.
It matters that we highlight these things, but we have to be so careful that we don't seem to be going along with them and giving them face, because we all know how important that is.
By the same token, Jacob, I understand your use of the word, but I would personally be pretty cautious before using the word genocide.
All right, well, I'll let you have the last word on that, because it was slightly 2 against 1 with 2 hawks and 1 dove, and the dove has managed to fly off from the coop or whatever it is doves live in. Anyway, thank you to Stanley and Alicia. Coming up, the Duke of Sussex has released another Netflix documentary, but could this represent the turning point he so desperately needs?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg. As many of you may already have guessed, beyond watching Tom and Jerry with my children, I'm not somebody who spends a great deal of time watching cartoons. But around the time State of the Nation launched, I was shown the following clip from the American satirical cartoon South Park.
It has been several months now since our beloved Queen has died. Our Canadians are finding it hard to go on. All Canadians, that is, except for our first guest, the Prince and his wife. We want privacy! We want privacy! All right, thanks for having us on the show. It's so awesome to be here. It's great. So let me start with you, sir. You've lived a life with the royal family. You've had everything handed to you, but you say your life has been hard, and now you've written all about it in your new book, Where?
Well, the word is pronounced privacy, but never mind. When it emerged the Duke of Sussex was creating a documentary with Netflix that was released today about the Invictus Games, it may have suggested some sort of a turning point. And I think it's very hopeful for the Duke. The Invictus Games were founded by him in 2014 after being inspired by the Warrior Games in the United States. The institution has been an enormous help to countless servicemen across the world who have been wounded when serving their countries. But as David Starkey has pointed out, the great overarching point of the Invictus Games is that in spite of some of the most brutal setbacks one could imagine, participants admirably overcome their hardship. Indeed, Invictus itself means unconquerable or undefeated. I think it's the motto of Kent. So will the Duke adopt this mentality himself, learning from his fellow veterans, rather than wallowing in victimhood? And will this restore him, which I think we would all like, to the affections of the British people? Still with me is my panel, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. Kelvin, this is just the sort of thing that a Royal Duke should be doing, making programmes about those who've served their country and have recovered through very tough times. I think there's a huge desire in this country to like Prince Harry. I don't think that's gone away. I may just be a sentimental monarchist, but I don't think it's gone away. And if he does things like this, isn't there a chance that actually his popularity will revive and people will forget about the last couple of years?
I think the way for his popularity to be revived will be, of course, if he actually ended his marriage and headed back over here, to be honest. I don't think there's a lot of chance. I do agree with you, doing this kind of stuff, anybody doing it, honestly, it's such a great thing. But then, when he had the opportunity to PR it, he talked about how he was left in a kind of fetal position, lying on the floor, recovering from his second tour of Afghanistan. And I think he always has to make it about him. And I think that is part of the royal family, which he has lost, right? The royal family grit their teeth and just get on with it, no matter how painful.
I read that bit that Kelvin read about how he responded afterwards. But that actually made me feel sympathetic to him, that I've never been out to fight for my country. I've never seen my close friends being blown to pieces as I've had a job to do for the state. I can understand that that is mentally enormously draining, and that when you come back, you do need a degree of support.
Well, can I just say, when I read that interview with absolute horror and also a degree of anger and certainly almost disgust. Look, I know a lot of people who are in Optelic, who are in Helmand, you know, who came back, who didn't have homes to go to, they didn't have financial security, they didn't have a family to actually return to. There are people who end up on the streets in many cases. We treat our armed forces appallingly in this country, and yet he's now said that he is suffering. He's the victim here when he had more, you know, in one day of his income, more than all of the rest put together for a year.
But
it made me angry.
With Invictus Games, isn't he?
Oh no, I don't take that away from him.
He's doing something to help people less fortunate than him.
Jacob, I don't take that away from him.
But by talking about his own experience, he makes it more immediate, more understandable.
Well, I'm sorry. I think the reaction amongst a lot of people in the ex-forces community will be, you know, we had to grin and bear it. We had to have a stiff upper lip. We had to actually make our own way. We didn't have palaces. We didn't have all these funds. We didn't have the publicity. And yet there he is, talking as if he's the only person in the world who's weeping.
One of the issues our country faces, and it is complete, and I've lived in the United States, one completely different, is there is a warmth and an embracing by politicians.
Thank you for your service.
Right. And thank you. And raising money. And I remember this about 3 years ago. I saw a soldier dressed in his fatigues walking across Waterloo Station. I had never seen that. I've been going to Waterloo Station for 30 bloody years. Right.
Well, it wasn't allowed because of the IRA. It wasn't allowed. Yes.
Right. Yes. Hold on a second. This was 3 years ago.
I know.
We did have a Good Friday Accord some years ago. I'm sure you remember
1998.
Right. So, I almost welled up at seeing this guy walking across there. We do not care. Now, I admire Harry because at least he's found a role for himself, right? But it's a role which is conducted with some kind of PR about himself and everything. I hate that about him. So I disagree fundamentally with your argument. You said I felt warm towards
But if you want to do anything political or charitable, you have to get publicity for it. You can't just be a shrinking violet.
He gets publicity doing his shoes up, Jacob. He doesn't need to worry about that.
He's got Oprah Winfrey on speed dial, hasn't he?
Who's he got on speed dial?
Oprah Winfrey on speed dial, you know.
Yes, but this is something.
And you see the size of her audience.
But from what both of you are saying, we don't look after our veterans well enough, in spite of great efforts.
Well, explain to me why that is, though, Jacob. As a politician, explain to me why it is that we don't have morning, noon and now. Why Rishi or Starmer, these people. So there's something about being a soldier or a sailor or an airman which seems to push you to the side of society.
I actually think we've been making great efforts in recent years. I think
the Armed Forces
Iraq
Covenant
and Afghanistan brought it home to people how dependent we were on our armed forces, and that it has improved, and that Remembrance Sunday is much better attended than it was. It had been.
I get that. That's absolutely true. But never forget, you know, the old Kipling. It's Tommy this and Tommy that, and chuck him out the brute. But it's saviour of the country when the guns begin to shoot, and that was as true today as it was then. But look, I think it's not just the ex-forces and the people, the veterans. It's also the serving people, you know, who live in appalling conditions. You know, imagine if we'd actually put some of the asylum seekers in the accommodation that we have for our armed forces, then the solids would hit the fan.
Well, that actually happened, and there were complaints about it. Admittedly, there were camps that were used for a few days rather than ones they were expected to live in for a long time.
So what does that say, Jacob? What does that say?
I think we are agreed that we should look after our armed services better. We're perhaps not entirely agreed about His Royal Highness's revitalisation of his reputation. But thank you to my panel. That's all from me. Up next, it's Professor Daniel Wootton. Dan, what's coming up on your programme? You must be talking about the Sussexes tonight.
Yeah, we might do a little bit of that with Angela Levin and Paul Burrell, I'm not going to lie. But we also have Andrew R.T. Davies in the House. He is the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, and he's talking about this really terrifying plan by Labour in Wales to limit the speed limit to 20 miles per hour. And I think it's part of a bigger war that Slippery Starmer is going to conduct against motorists. So we're going to explore that tonight, Jacob.
Well, Andrew is a great man, and he'll be a brilliant person to have on, and the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits are just a war against the motorists and is something that the government should just get rid of. Use the law to abolish it. Let's have some action. Anyway, it's going to be an exciting programme with Daniel. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and I'm sure the sun will be shining in Somerset beautifully all week.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the latest forecast from the Met Office here at GB News. Clear at first over the next 24 hours. Clouds then increase, rain spreading up from the southwest for many of us later on. We've got a gap in between weather systems for the time being, low pressure pushing into the North Sea, but the next low is on the way, bringing a series of weather fronts that will particularly affect Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest by the end of the night. Already the clouds are thickening across western areas through the evening and overnight. Clear spells for Scotland, central and eastern England at first, and actually quite a fresh feel here first thing Thursday with temperatures widely in the single figures. Not quite so fresh further west, where we've got the cloud keeping things a bit milder, and we've also got the rain moving in first thing. Some heavier pulses across parts of Northern Ireland during the morning, as well as Wales and the southwest. That rain slowly pushes into the rest of Wales, the Midlands, southeast England, but it largely avoids Scotland, where we just see 1 or 2 light showers in the afternoon, likewise for the north and northeast of England. Feeling warm where we do get some sunshine coming through, feeling disappointingly cool across the central slice of the UK, 16-17, where we've got the outbreaks of rain. Further rain to come across